for the club. So what I want to do is start out by just drawing you a corny little diagram, and you guys have all realized at this stage of the game that I'm not much of an artist. I just want to tell you a little bit of a story about something that happened to me when I was out in business in Colorado. So I was out in western Colorado in the Buena Vista area, where the Continental Divide runs through. There's a lot of great ski areas in that neck of the woods. And I was in a town called Buena Vista, Colorado. And as I was walking around downtown, and there ain't much to downtown, let me tell you, I noticed that there was a realtor's house, kind of a walk-in realty office, and the guy lived in the back of the house as well. And the first thing that just attracted my attention is the guy had a ham plate. Now the thing is, it could have been K, it could have been W, I'm not sure. But either way, call sign looked something like this. I kid you not. And as I'm walking by the house wondering, well, should I knock on this guy's door? What the hell? I got 2 days before I have to go to Denver. I've got nothing to do. I might as well find out what ham radio is about. I look at him, and this scraggly-looking hippie engineering type goes walking by me in the backyard. So I said, excuse me, you must be the ham. He says, yes. I said, I'm Woodstock generation. I do have a sense of humor. Is there any particular significance to your call? He goes, no. Interestingly enough, that was a randomly assigned FCC call. I thought it was kind of cute when I got it. I was a college student in the 60s, so no big deal. So now, let me tell you where Buena Vista is. Right in back of his house. It's the Continental Divide. What are the peaks at? 14,000 feet. Buena Vista sits where? At about 7,000 feet above sea level, which means heading east gets a tremendous signal. Get a little reflection off the hills behind you, right? But what do the hills behind you also do? Cut off sources of interference from the western part of the United States. So I asked him, how do you get out going west? He goes, I don't. I said, but you got to work the western states. You're in Colorado, so how do you do it? And he goes, well, we got a little secret. He says, I used to actually be an RF engineer, and me and a couple of buddies, we put together a remote station. I'm like, that's interesting. Where's your remote station? He goes, well, the range is around, 14,000, right? He goes, and we've got one up right around here at the peak of the peak up on Mount Yale. It's at 14,200 feet. And I have an RF link that we use to communicate the signal up to that remote transceiver to be retransmitted. It was really quite an undertaking, but we managed to do it. And guys, they were doing this with 90s era technology. I said, how do you get out? He said, how do you think we get out? 14,200 feet. We're heard everywhere. And that was my first exposure. But what I saw was a couple of specialists and a couple of engineers working their behinds off to do something that at the time was considered to be quite state-of-the-art. By comparison, how easy is remote control these days? It's not exactly plug and play. But as Fred and I have started looking at some of the available options, it's interestingly enough not as difficult to implement as you might think. To give you some focus as to why we're even having this discussion in the first place then, let me just talk a little bit about our intent, which is, number one, a few of us are retired old men with nothing better to do with our lives, and we're seeking another ham radio adventure. However, what this is really all about is we have had several club members transition recently to where they're no longer in a position to operate from their home, and that is where we would like to have a remote station capability set up, centralized within the club, that members of the club could access and use to get on the air on HF. So Robert, introduce yourself. Tell us what kind of living facility you live in or dwell in.
I'm Robert. I've been a ham since August of this year. Call sign. Yeah, terribly long time. KC1LTC is the call sign. And currently I reside in the sexton's abode of my church. My father's a sexton, so I can't really complain. I get to live there for free, essentially.
What's the church, by the way? Because you didn't say.
Stanwich Church in Backcountry Greenwich.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
But because it's not my house, it's a rented property, essentially. I can
Gotcha.
set up one of these gigantic antennas up on the roof to really get out there on HF. So it's a little bit of a pickle, but
good. I think you're a fan of the Vikings series, am I correct? Because you have the Berserker hat.
No, actually, it's
No?
from
Oh.
a concert I went to in the city.
Ah, what do I know?
Called the Montmartre,
Oh, okay, very good.
and that was their
Yeah.
concert for me. But
So you and I have had a couple of discussions, and
Yes.
what it's involved is Robert's been on to VHF so far. Also, it's a shame he didn't meet you a week before the Nutmeg looking for a VHF rig for 2 meters. The irony of it is Janine, who is one of our long-term club members, wanted to update her VHF rig. Showed up at the Nutmeg Hamfest up in
Gotcha.
Meriden. Buys a new one. Says, geez, he just quoted me a price of XYZ. We looked at her and said, geez, that's a great price, grab it. And then on the way back, she goes, the old rig, here, sell it. And we did, we got $25 for it. Would have been perfectly adequate.
okay.
But we've got a couple of responses, including one from Joe House, so we may be able to hook you up with something
Cool.
good at a reasonable price.
So,
But what are the frustrations of VHF? I mean, you can get out, right? You have an antenna mounted in a nice location. Then if you're just talking local, propagation, you can hit the repeaters on 2 meters, I'm
Yeah.
assuming, right? Just barely maybe, or...
I'm broadcasting on 8 watts, or well, probably 5 watts really, but
Okay.
on a little walkie-talkie. But
Gotcha.
where I live in backcountry Greenwich, you can't even tap the Stanford repeater. Really.
We've heard that, unfortunately, right?
Greenwich is bad.
So, when
And I'm
people think...
like right off the Merritt, so I'm pretty dense coverage
Mhm.
of trees and foliage and stuff. So maybe during the winter when that dies
They
off.
got an RF hole down there.
You
so.
do.
Yeah.
We got a couple of serious friends, I'm thinking Rob would tell them the same thing.
So I figured
Yep.
maybe if I pump up to like 50 watts or something like that,
You might.
we get out there a little easier. But
Right. Plus, we might be able to discreetly haul an antenna up in a tree that nobody will notice if we really work hard and look at your property. So, but really, what you're talking about there is VHF and range, and what we're talking about now is an HF pursuit
Right.
that would get you on the air from say 80 to 10 meters.
yeah.
Where we would intend to have the host station is Fred has gloriously volunteered his piece of property initially. Doesn't mean that ultimately it's going to reside there forever. We may have a combination of sites that we use. But now let's just talk about the advantages that Fred's property offers us. It's not quite as good as my LSD buddy, right? But it's not bad. So, if you know North Stamford, I'll draw this as if we're going up the hill. This is Webbs Hill Road. And Fred lives over here, just a few houses up from where Harry Houdini used to live when he lived in Stamford, right?
Actually down.
Down from there? Okay. But we've talked about your elevation up there before, and you know your magic number, which is what? Do you remember?
This is 167, I think.
Okay. So he's at 167 feet above sea level. Now, interestingly enough, how does that compare with other sites that we operate from? Well, it's better than our 2 field day sites, by about 20 feet. So, if this is south and north, what makes Fred's QTH a good site? All right. Well, he's up on the ridge, and to the west, he's above the ridge line. And there's a lovely slope down. Western propagation, superb. For those guys who've never been able to talk to anybody in Asia, this could change your life if we get the right antenna set up on Fred's property. Here's the other thing, though, and Fred and I had this conversation going back several years ago. I knew one of his neighbors, one of his crazy neighbors, and I told you that Sam once took me into his parents' bedroom and said, we just had the trees trimmed, take a look out the bedroom window. What makes Webbs Hill such a nice place to live in if you're Old Stamford? You can see all the way down Long Island Sound from Webbs Hill Road, as long as you look through the right, copse of trees, and there's no buildings in the way. So, what he's got is a great location to the west, a great location to the south. He, interestingly enough, is above the ridge line here that governs to the east,
The other side of the street is higher than
but not by much. Right, but there is a bit of an elevation going in this direction, so eastern is not going to be quite as good. So if you already operate HF and you've got a rig of your own, but you've never been able to hit Asia, so we're operating Fred's station at Fred's location using his antenna, take advantage of the natural elevation, can serve you very well. And that's basically what we're shooting for. Now, we have a couple rigs in the mix that have been volunteered for this. They're both ICOMs. Fred and I happen to be ICOM zealots. Okay? So, Fred's got one of these. And he has volunteered it to be one of the first host transceivers. I've got one of these. And once we get proof of concept done using this baby, we get all the kinks worked out, there's a possibility that if you use this mechanism, you will be using my 7610. So I may set that up at my house strictly for 80-meter communications, because I do have a nice 80-meter loop hanging off my 90-foot oak tree that gives me good propagation over to Europe. So that's what we're looking at. Why do we like the icons? Well, you know, if you talk to anybody, 7300 gives you a lot of bang for the buck for a transceiver, but these are both software-defined radios. I'd say they're really hybrids, but they fit the definition of an SDR in terms of they can be programmed to do a number of things. And what they have presently is some dedicated software available for the ICOMs. Doesn't run you a whole lot of money, okay? So, Fred, I just happened to notice when I went back and researched that there's version 1 of the software that we'll focus on in just a minute, which is made by ICOM, and there's a version 2. Have you ascertained the differences between 1 and 2?
I saw that they existed, but I haven't had time to
No
go
problem.
into the details.
Okay. The thing is, we started thinking about this going back to last summer. So interesting enough, if you haven't heard the story, it was John Sabini who came up with this idea. We were talking at the picnic, and we were just talking about good club projects to think in terms of going forward that would keep people interested. And this was his idea. And so, when we started to just check out what would it cost to get us off the ground, we found remarkably little money. So what Fred did was just come up with an estimate in August that said, look, allocate $100 so I can go out and get some software and we'll start playing. He would subsequently come back a few weeks later and say that the research he had done, and I think, Fred, this is what I confirmed today, that version 1's around 89, but version 2, right, is up at around 170 at this stage of the game. So the board voted the allocation for about $200 to buy that software if it's necessary. But as anyone here that knows me real well knows, I'm cheap. For proof of concept, to see if there's the interest level once we get this thing up and running, what we do is have the option to simply use the V1 version of the software, which as far as I know, at brass tacks level, can handle whatever we need, and do it for free. Because we have a gentleman that volunteers his software, which he's no longer using, for us to use to test with. Now, I do respect intellectual property, so if at some point we decide to go that route, what we will probably do is just apply the experience that we've learned in V1 to V2 and turn around and spend the allocated amount of money. Also, let me just point out that one of the things that we were just casually exploring is the notion that when the cash starts to roll in from the sale of Gus's equipment, that we would be in a position to allocate whatever's necessary here to get the project off the ground. But we're not talking an awful lot of money. And if I just had to draw it in for you to give you a rough idea as to how all this comes together, when you use the ICOM strategy, it's going to look something like this. You're going to have your host station, all right? So let's for the moment just assume that this is Fred's 7300. In turn, there's going to be a PC involved in all this. So the server software is going to be installed on the PC that's going to be hooked in series with Fred's 7300. And as you indicated, you already have the cable for doing that, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the host side, if you will. What's the client side going to look like? Interesting enough, a laptop or a desktop computer. So, in terms of the client, this is, if I was using old-fashioned IT terminology, what I would call a fat client implementation. There's software that's actually installed on it, and you're going to be using more than the browser on that PC. Okay? So the client is going to require the PC. And you can actually use this software that I'm going to show you on the screen in just a minute to do a couple of different things. So if you're just a regular ICOM user like me that wants to fully integrate the PC into the use of controlling the transceiver, you can do it. And the software is capable of being used for that. But what it's also capable of doing is exploiting the net connection between two PCs. So for anyone that wants to use this configuration when we first set it up, what's going to be required on your side? That you've installed the client software for the application on your laptop. That's basically all there is to it. Okay? So that's what we're looking at for starters. It's a good way to go. It's not going to cost us a lot of money. we can figure out whether we like it for less than 200 bucks. I will also, though, explain to you that there is another alternative scenario that seems to have captured everyone's imagination, and that has to do with a new piece of hardware that's been produced by MFJ. So how many of you guys have had any experience with the MFJ rig pie or heard of it? So you got one?
I've heard of it.
You heard of it, okay. So, it is what I would refer to as a browser-capable type implementation. So if I just have to draw this, by contrast, here's what you got. Okay, so here's your host. And again, that's just a regular 7300. I mean, if we're using Fred's rig. But just understand something. One of the advantages, then, of this rig pie configuration is it's what I would refer to as hardware agnostic. It doesn't care what you're using as a transceiver, because the work is going to be done by the dedicated piece of hardware known as the rig pie. For going this route, we're talking a few more dollars. So I've shopped around. I know that you had your initial estimate. And what I'm seeing is that we can pick up the rig pie for around $275 or so. And that in addition, there's a control cable that's custom for use with the ICOM 7300 and 7610 that's going to add something like 30 bucks to the bill. So if we were like to go this route, which a lot of people like these days, it's going to be a slightly larger investment. Ultimately, we could end up here. Why? The requirements for the client are minimal. If it's got a browser on it, folks, you can use it to operate remotely. Now, I'm not a big one for pulling out my cell phone to do RF work, but in theory, you have the capability of doing that.
There are apps for it.
Yeah.
Yes, you can do everything from your cell phone, any place.
Yeah. And the other thing is I'm assuming, because we had this discussion, that they bundle a tremendous variety of software that potentially can be used with this device, which in the end is a computer, basically a special purpose dedicated computer. So, I'm suggesting that we start here, and then depending upon the level of interest, if the level of interest really rises, we may someday go with that kind of an implementation. But either way, we're not talking about a lot of money. Yeah, questions so far?
The client side of the ICOM solution,
Yeah.
does that require special software on the PC?
It does. Yeah, as far as I know, on that disk, you've got host software and you've got client software, but we're still in the initial stages of assessing it.
What is the licensing scheme
We'll have to find
for
out.
client side?
Right. I have to assume there's no limitations on the client side by definition.
Yeah.
If you buy it, right? If you legitimately buy it, I'm assuming you're buying it for unlimited clients.
But which, well, maybe.
How else could you write it if you're selling it, is the way I would describe that, Yeah, so to be the buddy is made on the fact that they're selling you the software that's going to be installed in the house. That's the way I would put it. So anyway, that's what we're looking at so far. So just a quick poll. Who's interested? Yeah, because we have a couple people that are not in a position to operate, a couple people who haven't had a lot of HF experience and might be able to benefit by having kind of an intermediate way to get on the air without necessarily wallowing in the hardware. And I'm thinking, if we ever had a remote station in your site, you're up on a nice hill yourself. The Westover area is really nice to operate from. I don't know if you remember them. There used to be a very nice gentleman named Mr. Avka that lived on Westover Road, or not Westover, West Hill. And if you went about 7 houses up from yours, do you remember the Colemans? The Colemans had a lovely home that had a little alleyway that ran to the back of Knobloch Lane.
Oh.
This is one up from the Coleman's house.
Yeah,
He had
okay.
an 85-foot antenna tower, and he really got out. Let me show you a description put out by ICOM of what the software looks like. Okay. So this is it, and it's been out for a while. This is software that has been out working with ICOMs for a few years now, and it's just been once again optimized in version 2. So this is referred to as RSBA1, been around for quite a while, And like I say, Tom Alessi has had experience with implementing this. It's a very popular offering, but it's hardware specific to ICOMs. Again, not a disadvantage to us because two of the most interested participants own ICOMs, yes.
It's probably limited the client side to Windows, correct?
Yes, as far as I know.
So you're
The
disenfranchised.
Apple people, he's the Apple person.
Right. Well, interesting enough, though, installation requires Unix. So I withhold judgment until we read through everything. All right. So, this is what it looks like, and we don't get really good resolution here as we're pulling it up on the screen. But basically what it boils down to is, this little portion right here is simply imitating the control panel of the host transceiver. And so, when you take a look at it here, what you'll note is that there are software buttons or software-driven buttons that correspond to the basic functionality that will show up. And in this instance, what they're doing is giving you the demonstration in the context of the 7610, where I have the dual receiver capability. So basically, you can exploit just about any functionality inherent to the 7300 or the 7610 through this mechanism, because again, it's a dedicated proposition designed to work on a proprietary basis with ICOM rigs. So, in effect, that's what it looks like when you get it up and running. When you take a look at some of the things that they advocate you attempt to use with it, then I'll just give you a rough idea. This pretty much reflects what I was doing up on the whiteboard as to how the configuration is going to work. Now, I'm sorry, I did not anticipate the computer monitors being in our way when we did this.
Probably could slide those cables apart.
Let us see this.
It's this one here
Wait,
mainly.
you're gonna pull out the
This is as far as I'm going.
cords.
The city has people to fix them.
That's gonna pull something off. Look, it's got,
Well, you need
Yeah.
to go 6
How mu-
inches or so.
We need 6 inches, right? Is that the
Yeah,
consensus?
6 inches would help.
All right, somebody yell. How's that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you want to move, you can do that too.
Steve,
But I'll
get the
enjoy
light. You can see it better without the light.
Okay. But all they're showing you here is the two configurations in which you're likely to use the software. So let me get back to what I said initially. If you own an ICOM, one of the reasons you may buy this software is you simply want to control the ICOM using your computer, and this is the way to do it. And so that's the first scenario they're describing there, where you have a direct Ethernet connection between your PC and your rig. The alternative scenario that they're describing, though, is when you are using it and you are accessing it from a PC, where the PC is going to be the client. And in effect, you are talking to the rig from the PC hooked up to the client to the PC that's hooked up to what they're referring to as the base server. So ultimately, what you have to do when you install this configuration for remote purposes is you put the server software on the server and the client server on the clients. Here's the thing, though. You gotta love the way people market stuff. Because I'm thinking this is so far a very reasonably priced proposition, right? To give economical communications capability to people. Well, before I get into the punchline on that thought, all I want to show you is here's the compatible list of all the functionality from all the glory-oriented ICOM rigs that are out today, and how much of the functionality is capable of being handled by this mechanism. So if you take a look, on the IC 7610 stage, working with the dual watch function or the two receivers is an option that you can exploit with it, as well as setting up the server functionality so you can control the rig. You've got the ability to remotely power off and on the unit. You get to see the actual spectrum waterfall scope with all the colors on a huge display. And you have the built-in CW keyer capability. You got voice recognition playback capability and USB dial, all capable of being exploited through the software on a remote basis. So it does a pretty good job of really imitating the functionality. But when you look at the expectations, yes, Windows, Windows, and Windows. Okay? Now, when I talk to you about accessories and how you can make zillions of dollars when you're a manufacturer in the hand business, remember, all this is software driven, right? The image comes up, you press buttons on the image. But that's not going to be good enough to give people the real feel of a transceiver. So, when you're tuning across the band, you can use the left mouse to go down, you can use the right mouse to go up, and there are direct frequency input capabilities that are there as well. But take a look. RC28 USB remote encoder. I'm looking at this son of a gun today and going, it's 240 bucks. What the hell does this thing do? Well, take a look at it. It's very difficult to describe unless you're like right on top of it, but it looks like a wheel on top of a weighted plastic platform with 2 push buttons. What is it? It's imitating a remote hardware tuning dial. So if you don't want a left mouse click to go down and right mouse click to go up incrementally, you can imitate basic analog functionality by sticking your finger and twirling the knob. All for 240 bucks. I'm sure this is going to be a hot commodity at Christmas. What do you guys think? Not necessary. I need a laptop with the client software on it. That's all I need. So that's what we're looking at. Question before the house. Does anybody know anybody that is doing remote operation now? All right. Because we're still soliciting opinions.
What about that, you know that website, remotehamradio.com?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What they're doing
yeah.
is no different than what we're doing.
That's what I was.
Right. Really, I mean, in the end,
Though, yeah.
they're a hell of a lot better at it than we are. I may end up talking to some of those people for advice.
Yeah.
There used to be that company that was up in Rockland, a company that used to do the antenna tower installation work, where the 2 owners have decided that's beneath their dignity. They've given that business to a couple of friends of their sons, and now they've gone into remote. And yeah, they'll sell you a remote subscription, for lack of a better way to put it. This is a profit-making endeavor. Now, the arguments over whether this is legal or ethical are endless.
Really?
Yeah. Although, really, from my standpoint, this is a legitimate business, and I don't have a problem with it. But to others, they're making money on ham radio. Well, I know, but so do
But they
people like
still
HRO, right?
Yeah, they still have to put up equipment that has
Right.
costs.
Right.
They've got costs.
So there has been some resentment that these people have been making big contributions to perfecting all this. Do you follow me? You know, in terms of implementation schemes and the like. But yeah, they're doing the same thing we are, just a lot more expertise. If you ever talk to those guys, let me tell you, as RF engineers go, they're pretty bright. Because I did call one of them out of the clear blue, just had an amiable conversation about, so I need an antenna installed. I need to speak to one of your son's friends. Yes, here's the name. They're both good kids, da da da. So how you doing with this remote stuff? And he said something defective. Technologically, it's fascinating and we're having time. Acceptance is going to take a while, though. Do you know what I'm saying? So what they seek to do is a business venture with probably a pretty significant hardware investment. We seek to do as a, not a charitable function, but as a betterment for society kind of function, and do it cheaply. I mean, that's
Yeah,
really no
exactly.
secret to me. And like I say, what makes it easy is the fact that Fred and I both have the willingness to experiment, and the icon rigs that are so amenable to the use of the software. Now, the thing is getting back to the RigPi solution, again, something we may want to look for down the road if this stuff really takes
That'll
off like
work for the
wildfire.
Mac folks, right?
That it will, as far as I know.
Yeah.
There is a separate Mac product, though, that's
Oh, yeah?
available as well, I think, for the Icon line. But yeah, again, hardware agnostic, but here's the other thing. A separate computer, if you will. So, probably a lot more integration opportunities for that thing to work not only with the transceiver hardware, but also the other control hardware that's going to be running your configuration. So, just to give you a rough idea as to where we would start, if we're doing this over Fred's house, Fred presently has one OCF antenna. The first part of our experiment will be to put up at least one resonant antenna, if you follow me, to test with.
My antenna is great for maybe 40 meters is really
Right.
great on.
Right, but if you understand my point, I want to be implementing this with a type of antenna, like a very simple dipole, initially, where we'll just string it from 2 other trees on your property, but I want it resonant. Or put up an 80-meter dipole where it's resonant, say, midband, and then just try testing the configuration of using the internal tuner to tweak it to be able to operate down around like 3650, somewhere in that range. So on the antenna side, and for the other peripherals, we'll start simple. In other words, we're trying to connect to the transceiver and get you on the air. But as things develop, we may be in a position to embellish the hardware configuration as well for the antennas. Now, if anyone's got a lovely piece of property they'd like to donate to the cause for another server location, we're all ears. I'm assuming if you had such a situation, you would have let me know by now. My thought, in case you were curious, was years ago, before I saw the museum's model for what there was going to become of the back parking lot, I was thinking of putting this in the tallest oak tree we could find in the back lot. don't look like that's going to happen. You know? But obviously, we need a residence that's already hosting a internet hookup, which Fred says is not any problem. So, what I would like to do for implementation timelines, though, is to just compare version 1 and 2. I'll start on that. We'll see what the net difference is. If there's not a significant enough difference, though, we'll just try a configuration setup and prototype it on version 1. Maybe what we'll do is try and arrange for a simple demo from here for the December meeting, if we can pull it off. And then as things develop, if we actually get a real solid working configuration, maybe use that as the presentation theme for the January meeting, along with getting through the election process. So anyway, that's what we're looking at presently. And when you see these guys on the air, and you listen to the audio that comes across, it's all digital. It's all pretty good. And if you believe the ICOM people, they've overcome the latency issues that are usually inherent when you're doing a lot of digital traffic. And, you know, you're just concerned as to whether or not you're going to get the audio throughput at the right speed and like. It looks as if they've managed to whip all those issues. Does anybody know anyone that's tried the ICOM stuff directly, though? I'm curious. Okay. Well, Fred, this is going to be an interesting scenario. What do you think?
Yeah, and also looking at the software, on the Pi, the Ring Pi, the impression I got is that that uses a collection of software which is available to anybody.
That's what I thought. Right.
Did they say whether they use a Pi 3 or Pi 4?
I don't remember seeing it.
Because the Pi 4 is actually pretty powerful. I think it's about the same. I think it's the original $35, as I recall.
Yeah.
I know on the Pi 4 it has 2 high-definition output videos.
Right. Okay. I'll check into that. I'm curious myself now that you brought it up. The other thing I did want to say, by the way, is traditionally, in case you're curious about us missing something, November is usually the meeting when we present the field day scores. The ARRL has been less efficient at getting the scores out early, and we did check today, right on the contest server, and as of this afternoon closing, they had not yet published the scores. In the old days, it was typical they would come out in proximity to Halloween. For the last couple of years, it's been more like Veterans Day. So we'll check again. All right? But that's it in terms for what I wanted to say. If anyone has got any comments or questions, feel free to chime in.
How did we do at the
The nutmeg.
Yeah.
Well, we had a great time, so I will acknowledge Terry's efforts in helping me go up there and transport all the stuff up there, which he did very cheerfully. We got up there. It was good. The weather outside was good for change, wouldn't you know it? We spent $40 on the tables. Now, understand this comes out of the grand till, right? So the widow was aware of the fact she'd be paying $40 for the 2 tables. We laid out all the equipment. We even had a menu to hand to people as they walked by to let them know what was available. And these were the cheapest bunch of low-life, scum-sucking lowballers I've ever seen. It gets worse every year. And I did try to chase 1 or 2 of them away with that. Did anybody explain to you this is an estate sale? That's what you say to a lowballer. Usually what you're communicating to the lowballer is if you just open your mouth again with another lower price offer, I'm going to hit you over the head with what's left of the hardware. You follow me? But I think we sold a grand total of about $165 worth of goods. People love the Orion 2 though. So the Orion 2, which was Gus's pride and joy, it was the wonder rig of the single-digit 2000s. So, you know, the 2000-aught era. Went for $10,000 back in the day and was respected as the greatest rig available. When the K3 started coming out, it was the Orion 2 that they started to try and do the head-to-head receiver comparisons against. What does it go for today? Based on the arrival of all the new solid-state rigs with all the new capabilities in SDR, I got $1,250 for it, and I consider it a major miracle I got that much for it. And it went to a very appreciative gentleman who's my age and lives down in Louisiana who always wanted an Orion. God bless him, so it did go to a good set of hands. I would also like to say thank Stan, who came through for us and was nice enough to get us permission to announce the availability of the equipment on the WECA bulletin board. And God bless us, they accounted for 1 high-power tuner, 1 linear, and I just sold off the Jupiter to one of their newer members. I was kind of disappointed. I thought one of the new members in our club, or GNARC, would be interested in the Jupiter, but they weren't. And it was so fascinating because she showed up. She said, look, I've been a technician. I just passed general. The guys would kind of laugh at me if I openly admitted